Welcome everybody from near and far. As the names and places have come through my chat, I see we have a few people from across the pond in Europe, and I saw someone gave a shout out from Saudi Arabia. As far as I know, in my Jewish learning, in my Jewish learning teaching, it's the first time we have somebody from Saudi Arabia. So, well, wherever you are, welcome, and we're glad so many people are here. And now I see the Southern Hemisphere piping in as well. As people are typing in, I'm waiting for that to slow down a second. I'm going to put in the chat a link to the slides. You don't need the slides. I'm going to project them on the screen. I'm going to share my screen, but I know some people like to look around or check some things out later. So I'm putting a link right there. It should be at the bottom of your chat. Maybe Mara, when the hellos stop, while we're going, if you repost it, then everyone will see it later.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you. All right, this week is Parashat Terumah. For me personally, I'm excited about this week because it's the second anniversary of my youngest daughter's bat mitzvah. And it may be that she appears as one of our sources in her commentary on the Parsha, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, I have a teacher who said, like, you can't have a favorite Parsha because they're all from the Torah, they're all great. But I know for me personally, like having sat in synagogue and watched, my daughter teach this Parsha, I think it's because, my daughter makes it, I guess it's I have favoritism for my children, so the Parsha connected to their Banot Mitzvah becomes a favorite of mine. Let's jump right in, though. I am going to share my screen and start the slideshow. There we go. So this week's Parsha is Terumah, and it starts with these verses that are here on your screen. I've highlighted two phrases for you, and I'm going to comment about them in a second. But for those who are listening and not watching, I'll read the text. God spoke to Moses saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart is so moved. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for setting the ephod and for the breastplate. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." So the two phrases that I've highlighted on the screen are ones that often jump out to people who are talking about this week's Parsha. Right, the Israelites are in the desert. They've gone through the spectacle of Mount Sinai. They've received the Torah, and the project for the end of the book of Exodus is building the tabernacle, sacred space that could be central to the Israelites' religion and their connection to God, a space where Moses could actually go to communicate with God, etc. Service by the priests. Two things jump out at commentators and speakers of this week in our cycle. One is the notion that every person makes a gift to this project in the way that their heart is moved. And sometimes when people talk about this parsha, they talk about the notion of we all have to give, and we all give in different ways. And we all contribute to the whole, but we should honor everyone no matter what type of gift they're giving. That's often a theme. That's the first highlighted line. And the second one is the end. The purpose of this whole endeavor of the whole collection is to make me, meaning God, a sanctuary, that I may dwell among you, the people. The purpose of this is so that the people can always have a place where they can connect to God. Sometimes we think of Judaism as a religion of time. But many religions are a religion of space. And the people wandering in the desert, we know, sometimes felt distant from God. There's a lot of complaining. Those are for other week's Parshiot. After Mount Sinai, after that powerful event, there's some need, it seems, to have a place that represents God's presence in the community and a place where people can focus for their spiritual needs. That's another theme in this parsha. But those are not the things we're going to talk about today. When I look at this list, what jumps out at me is in addition to those things, the things on the list in particular, right? Gold, silver, copper, blue, purple yarns, et cetera, et cetera. And I think here is this wandering tribe of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the desert. Where did they get all this stuff? And especially the things that jumps out the most about when I think of that question, where did they get all this stuff, is especially the dolphin skins. Okay, goat's hair, a little makes sense. Maybe they have some goats. Gold, silver, copper, maybe they don't have so much, but those are materials that humans have been making jewelry from. So maybe people had some pieces of jewelry, despite that they had humble beginnings in Egypt and they fled. But there's all these things on the list. And the question I have is, like, where did they get them from? And especially with the laser focus on dolphin skins, how did they get dolphin skins, right? Dolphins are sea creatures. They live in the depths. It didn't seem that the Israelites took a stop to go deep sea fishing, or I don't know anything actually about how you would get dolphin skin and the capture of dolphins. We know dolphins are very intelligent creatures and roam the seas, and maybe the animal rights part of me says we should be harvesting dolphin skins either way. But anyways, this stands out for me in the parsha. What are the dolphin skins? Where did they come from? How is it possible that they had them? And maybe a stand-in for some of the rest of these things. So what we're going to look at today is a number of commentaries, explanations about what dolphin skins actually might be. The word is in Hebrew is tachash, arot tachashim. The Hebrew says, right, the skins, leather made from tachashim. And we're going to dig in a little bit to see what is a tachash, which the many translations translate as dolphins, but we'll come back to that in a second. So answer number one, this goes to one way we answer lots of our questions about the Torah, which is, what does the Torah itself say? Where did they get all these things, including maybe dolphin skins? Well, if you go back to before the Exodus, right, I'm jumping back 13 chapters, Exodus 12, we find the following verses. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver, gold, and clothing. And God had disposed the Egyptians favorably towards the people, and they let them have their request. Thus, they stripped the Egyptians. But in the preparations to leave Egypt, Moses tells the people to go and get supplies for their journey and to borrow from the Egyptians. And the text says that God sort of somehow put it in the hearts of the Egyptians to give generously, or maybe so that the Israelites could strip the Egyptians. It's a little strong word. Maybe they left them with nothing and took a lot. But the simplest answer based on what the Torah gives us is, how did the Israelites get all of these things? Well, when they left Egypt, they borrowed them from the Egyptians, and these things on the list might all be things that the Egyptians had. Since the Egyptians had these things and they lent generously to the outgoing people, that's how they got them. And if you want everything to tie up in terms of plot, right, you can connect today's verses back to that and say, well, the Egyptians had dolphin skins, right? Egypt, we know, is a great empire with lots of trade and connections, industry and things. So they have gold and lapis lazuli and maybe dolphin skins, and that's where the Israelites got them from. So that's potentially one answer to the question. It doesn't help us with identifying what dolphin skins are. If we want to dig into that, we have to go to the next slide, right? The Jewish Publication Society's note in their translation where they say tchashim are dolphins, there's a footnote that says meaning of Hebrew uncertain. And if you search translations of the Bible, you'll see throughout time, many different animals were translated as tchashim: antelopes, badgers, dolphins, dugong, giraffe, narwhals, okapi, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you notice a few things about, I snapped some pictures from the internet of some of these animals. We have some sea creatures, like in the dolphin family, although there's a narwhal and a dugong. We have some land animals many of which are multicolored or have stripes or something like that, like the okapi that you see in the bottom right, or even on the badger that's here, there are stripes on the head. Some of them have horns, a singular horn, or the giraffe has little horns on the top, and the narwhal has a very interesting singular horn. But we have a whole array of ways that the word chashim has been understood, and a whole array of animals. And any time we have so many animals listed as this, it means like, well, maybe we don't really know. And while dolphin skins has sort of become a standard in English translations over the centuries, if you dig in and you do a search and you look at all these places, you'll see many possible things, some on the list and even more. There's an endless list. We could have done just a whole session on all the different animals that people said chashim were. What might they be? What were some of the answers that people have given over time besides just a word in a translation? Let's look at some more sources. Another way to look right before, how did they get all the stuff? We look back to Shemot. Another way we can figure out what are chashim is to see where else this word is used in the Bible. And the other place that the word tachash shows up is in a prophecy of Ezekiel in chapter 16, where God there is speaking about how God had beautified Jerusalem. And then people didn't take advantage of all the gifts that God gave. That's you could look that up and see. But there's a phrase where it says God clothed you. God's talking to Jerusalem here, but there's anthropomorphism. I clothed you with embroidered garments and gave you sandals of dolphin leather, right? Na'alaim from tachash to wear, and wound fine linen around your head and dressed you in silks. So based on Ezekiel, we see that whatever a tachash is, its skin was used to make sandals. And those, and to make sandals from leather means you need to, if you're going to wear it on the bottom of your feet, you're going to have protection. Needs to be some kind of thick and both flexible leather that you can use to do that. And two of our medieval biblical commentators connecting to this verse from Ezekiel that says, oh, the leather of Tachashim was used to make sandals. Both look to domesticated animals that people used to make sandals and other things. Ibn Ezra, 12th century of Spain, says perhaps it was an ox. There are lots of different oxes. I love this picture of this ox. It has some nice fur, but underneath is the nice thick leather. And Ralbag, a 14th century French commentator, says it was actually a goat. And here's the ibex, native to Israel mountain goat in this picture here. And so far away from the dolphin leather that's in our modern translations, but based on this reference in Ezekiel that says a tachash skin is used to make sandals. Well, these are animals that oxen and goat were used in leatherworks, and maybe because of the functionality of the tachash, their leather was used both for sandals there and for the covering that was made from the tachash in the tabernacle. So one possible direction. Here's another. In the Babylonian Talmud, there's a debate in Masachet Shabbat. It talks about the tachash, and Rabbi Nehemiah says the tachashim were similar to a species called the tela ilan, Rabbi Nehemiah says that there were tachashim, and it's similar to this other species that we know about called the tela ilan. For me, that didn't help because while an ox and a goat, I knew what it was. A tela ilan, I didn't know what it was. But in the Steinsaltz English commentary, Steinsaltz brings us a picture of a tela ilan. He says it's the spotted genet. Maybe that's how it's pronounced. If any of you have a spotted genet at home or know how to pronounce it, you can correct me later. But it seems to be some kind of cat that's here in the picture with some different shades in the tail and stripes. And Rabbi Nehemiah says the tachash might be the tela ilan, and Steinsaltz tells us, identifies for us what that might be, this cat. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, isn't this tela ilan a non-kosher creature? Objecting because the assumption the rabbis in the Gemara made that any animal product used in the tabernacle must have been a kosher animal, that we wouldn't have put products of non-kosher animals in the tabernacle, and this cat is not a kosher animal. So the Gemara changes Rabbi Nechemiah's statement and says, this is what Rabbi Nechemiah intended to say. It was like the Tela Ilan, that it was multicolored, but it was not actually a Tela Ilan. So maybe Rabbi Nechemiah is saying, well, it's not the Tela Ilan, it's like the Tela Ilan, meaning it's the attributes, the characteristics, like the stripes and the multicolors that it has. That's what makes it like a Tela Ilan, but it's actually a kosher animal. And Rav Yosef says, oh, that might be why in the Aramaic translation of the Torah, Tachash is translated into Aramaic as Saskona, and he makes a pun on that word, because I think we also don't know what a Saskona is, but Sas could mean to celebrate, like Sason v'simcha, celebration and joy. And Gona, if you change the Vav from the O vowel sound to the V consonant sound, it sounds like it shares letters with Givanim, which means different shades and colors. So if we have a multicolored, multi-shaded animal, like the Tela Ilan you see in this picture, maybe the Saskona, the ancient Aramaic translation of the Torah from Hebrew to Aramaic, helps us reinforce that. In fact, it is some kosher animal similar to this cat, which was a species that Rabbi Nechemiah seemed to know. This Talmudic approach represents sort of one of the ways you can go in answering our question: what are the dolphins? Where did they come from? Which is to say, what specific animal could this be? Let's figure it out. And if we go this route, we get a picture of one nice one. Maybe that's it. No, maybe not. Another approach, Midrash Tanchuma, goes a little more to the fanciful land. Gives us two different interpretations, a little more removed maybe from what we know about the world of animals. But Rabbi Yehuda says it was a large, pure animal, right? So large, big and pure, meaning kosher here, with a single horn in its forehead and a skin of 6 different colors that roamed the desert. They captured one of them and from its skin made a covering for the ark. So Rabbi Yehuda says this is an animal with a single horn, 6 colored animals, so maybe multicolored. Like if you Google 6 colored one-horned animals, you'll get lots of pictures of rainbow unicorns. So it's possible it was a rainbow unicorn. Definitely the single horn makes it unicorn-like. And in fact, my friend and colleague, Rabbi Kerry Olitsky, who's been writing Jewish children's books of late, actually wrote his modern Midrash story called The Desert Unicorn, based on this Midrash and our story in the Parsha. And I gave you a picture of the cover of the book there. You could check it out. He or his illustrator didn't go with the rainbow theme in the unicorn in the picture. He has a white unicorn with the horn. But Rabbi Yehuda says 6 colors, whether those are earth tones like the Saskona that we saw above, or the ox and the goat we saw before that, I don't know. In my imaginary time thinking about this, like the rainbow unicorn sounds great in terms of the bright and pastel-y kind of colors that could be. Rabbi Nechemiah adds to Rabbi Yehuda's comment and says that he suggests that this was a miraculous creature that God created for this precise moment in time, and then it disappeared from the earth after that. Meaning, we needed the Israelites needed a tachash to make the Mishkan. So what did God do? God made sure there was a tachash at this time, which the Israelites found and captured, and used it to make the Mishkan. And then it went away. It no longer exists on the earth. And Rabbi Nechemiah's explanation says there was some animal that fits this. And the reason why we don't know what it is now is because it was an animal that existed just for that moment in time, not before, not after. And it will remain a mystery to us because we don't have them anymore. But it allows this leather that was crafted for the Mishkan to be extra special because it was a singular moment, singular animal in time. Next, changing paths altogether. There's a wonderful article that you can find online, and I gave you the link here. So you should copy the link to the slide. if you want to check this out later. Oh, sorry. Rabbi Norman Solomon, who taught at Oxford, he's contemporary. Most of his work is in the 20th century. He explored this issue of what is the tachash, and he brought some sources from Assyriologists and other professors studying the ancient world, who suggest that a tachash, right, the orot chashim, tachash leather, is not the leather of a particular animal, but it's leather that's gone through a particular process. And he suggests that, based on the work of these professors that he read, that tachash could be translated not as the name of an animal, but maybe as beaded leather. And that there was a process in the ancient world where ceramics or beads or stones were attached to leather and beautified. You have a picture of two different pictures of what this could be here. One is a decorative item, and one is actually some kind of shoes. Those shoes have papyrus bases, not leather bases. But it could be that the tachash leather was not something that came from an animal. It was any leather, but what made it tachash leather is that it was decorated in a particular way, and that the tachash leather is the result of a craft process. And actually, some of the things that were put on leather, gold, turquoise, lapis lazuli, that the researchers suggested were part of this process, are some of the other things on the list from the Torah. And so this root, which does not at all try to identify what animal this kind of leather is from, is rooted in the fact in how the word tachash relates to some other ancient languages, and what we know from archaeology about some processes that went through. And it's possible that this covering that was made from leather to go in the Mishkan was decorated through some process similar to what you see here in these pictures, and that we're not in search of a mythical creature or a unicorn or an ox or even a dolphin, but rather it's an art form, and that Jewish commentators have been off track in trying to identify what animal this is, and that maybe here this is a time where the archaeologists and the ancient Assyriologists know more about how to help us understand the Torah than our own commentators. That perhaps we're looking at this art process, not specific animal. So what do we make of all this? This brings me to the 21st century North American commentator Leora Goldberg, my daughter, who said the following 2 years ago this Shabbat at her bar mitzvah. One thing I learned through the study of this parsha is that sometimes it's a good thing when the Torah is not clear. It makes the story much more interesting when there is something to figure out. It makes it so that anyone can have an opinion and add to our knowledge of the Torah, which is part of what it means to become a bat mitzvah, both to learn and to teach. What I love about this takeaway from Leora's study, her study of the Tachash, some of which two of us did together, is that the mystery of these questions, when you look at the Torah, whether it's about identifying an animal that's associated with a single word, or bigger questions like where did the Israelites get all this stuff, or any of those moments where something's not clear in the text. What Leora's teaching was about that actually this is where the power of the Torah comes from. The fact that the Torah invites us in by leaving things out. The Torah invites us in by not always being clear. It's what gives us our voice and allows us to enter into the story. We're lucky that we have centuries and centuries and centuries of commentaries of our ancestors who did just that, and that we're part of a process that lets us jump in at our own voices as well. And that means we can all become biblical commentators. We can all become teachers of Torah. And as Leora noted, that's part of what this celebrating your bat mitzvah is about. And for everyone who's here with us today on this Zoom call, who by definition are lifelong learners of Torah, we know that lesson as well. And just like the Parsha opened by saying everyone brought, right, God was open to everyone bringing whatever their heart moved them to bring to help build the Mishkan. I think it's true about our study of Torah. I think that God embraces and our community embraces all the Torah and all the interpretations and all the questions and comments that each of us bring, no matter what our background, where we're coming from, and we all add to them. And while the things that were collected in this week's Parsha built a Mishkan, a physical tabernacle where God's presence could be, and when we all come together and add our words of Torah and join them together, we create a different kind of sacred space in which God's presence and the Torah is felt. And in the 21st century, we can do that together in the same room and also here on Zoom from around the world. So that's what I have to say about this week's Parsha. We have a few moments to go. I see while I was sharing today, there were 81 new messages. So I'd love to see if there are questions that people want to ask, or Mara, if you've been able to follow along, if you have noticed any comments that stand out, I'd be happy for you to help facilitate.
We have quite a few puns in the chat, but also
nice.
I definitely want to bring attention to how people appreciated your daughter's insights, and they're waiting for Sefer Leora. So
nice. Okay, I will pass that on. As she's currently 15, she hasn't yet chosen where her future lies. But I do have to say, it was a proud moment as a dad to hear how we studied the sources together, but she did the writing on her own. And I loved how she weaves them together. So was happy to share that. Nothing gave me greater pleasure than writing, 21st century North America commentator to go with Ibn Ezra, right? 12th century Spain.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just saw someone said they wanted to look more into the beating piece there. What I would, if you, I'll put it back in the quote again. Sorry, in the chat. This is the link to the slides, and you can find in the link to the slides the article on Torah.org, which is a great website, by the way, that gives you a little more of the research and references to other places. If you're an artist and you're interested, or you're a Torah student and you're interested, or you just like reading interesting things, I would suggest you find some of them. All right, sorry, back to you. If you had other things.
Another theme, and this was a little bit earlier in our discussion, but people were really stuck on the word borrowed in terms of things, borrowing from the Egyptians. And could you speak a little bit to that translation and your thoughts on what it means to borrow something that you definitely can't return?
Yes. It occurred to me that someone would bring that up today. And I set it aside only because it's from chapter 12 and a parsha of a few weeks ago. But that's a great question about the text there, right? The story of the Exodus, we like to read as an uplifting story, right? We were slaves. God, through Moses and Aaron, redeemed us. There were miracles, and we left to the desert and became a free people, and et cetera, et cetera. But there are some moments that give me pause, and maybe not just me. And that's one of them, right? I mean, I would say the whole plagues episode can be tough, right? There's a lot of collective punishment on the Egyptians for Pharaoh's decision-making, which is challenging. And that moment in those verses is challenging, right? Moses sort of says, go to your neighbors and borrow some things before we go on this journey, which could sound kind of innocent, but we know that the Egyptians and the Israelites were very different classes of society. One was enslaved people, and one, right, were citizens of the ruling empire. And the word in the Hebrew, it does suggest borrowing in Hebrew, but I think whoever pointed that out, right, it seemed that, it's sort of, we do this in our day, can I borrow some water? Sure, but I don't want it back, right? Have you been in that right? Sometimes the thing you borrow, you consume. But right, the second half of the verse I quoted says, right, based on how God intervened and made the Egyptians open to giving, it says Israel stripped the Egyptians, right? Israel, you could read that as strongly as, right, they robbed them of their wealth. Some of the commentators say like this was in compensation for the free labor they had given for generations as slaves to try to justify it. But there is some sort of notion that it could be, looting. It might go to other areas that aren't so ethical and moral. So the people who raise that up, I think that's a great question. And maybe we'll note down, uh, next year when that parsha comes around, I'll sign up and we could dig into bleed out there. No promises. I don't know what the counter is going to be. It's a long way off. But digging into that question, it's saying, can we square, the behavior of the Israelites in this moment with the ethics we hope that they would have? If their behavior doesn't square, do we want to justify it? Is this an expression of humanity that in these moments where as they're leaving, some looting and rioting happens? And like we see that in different ways in our own world today as part of human nature. There's a whole range of possibilities. While that subject matter can be challenging, what I love about that verse is it forces us to have some intense and challenging conversations about ethics, morality, what the Exodus was really like, what it was like, not just for the Israelites, but also for the Egyptians. Anyways, that's on one foot, some thoughts about that verse. There's a lot more to say there. If you're interested, I mean, I would suggest also go to the slide so you have that verse and take the verse to Safaria, look it up there, where with one click, you can open up all the commentators and do a little research yourself. And if your bat mitzvah is almost a year away and has Exodus 12 in it, that could be what you speak about. And anyways, all right. Other thoughts? Anyone have a question they want to ask? We have a few moments still left today.
Just we have a lot of people here, and okay, great.
Yeah, I see Rob.
Great.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, good morning, Shabbat Shalom. So, the material for the creation here came from us. We had to gather up all this material. But the material for the creation of the world, God just snapped his fingers, uttered a few words, and made everything. And we're about to start a section because it's a parsha after parsha, chapter after chapter, just telling us how to build a tent and a bunch of furniture. Very, very complicated, so much. And I think this shows the difference between God and man, the awesome power of God just to speak a few words to create the entire universe. And here it takes us, we're going to be in these reads for weeks and weeks talking about just to build a little tent in the middle of the desert. And we can't even figure out what this one word means.
That is true. That is true, right? Right. Reshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. It takes like a chapter and a half, and without so much detail, God makes it all happen one day at a time. I love that, Rob. Right, yeah. If you know what's coming, the plan. We have many parshiot of both. Here's how to build the Mishkan, and then almost word for word the same. Here's us building the Mishkan. We focus on that a lot, and I love that Torah, Rob. Thank you for bringing that comment. I really appreciate it.
I'm sorry to interject here, but it just is, it's making me really happy. You brought in Torah from your daughter, Rabbi, and Rob's father is also here. So it's just really lovely when we have some generational Torah happening, even when we're all far away from each other.
Nice. I didn't know that. I'm glad you called that out. Rob's, if you're a regular in the My Jewish Learning online learning, I have to say, if you should follow Rob in the chat. His commentary on the weekly parsha, or the teacher of the weekly parsha, or when we get together for the review of the weekly Daf Yomi, like study of Talmud. Rob is a teacher in his own right. I always go back and read the chat to see what Rob had to say along the line. So I'm glad he got to voice it, for us all to hear. But it's in the Zoom world where there's so many of us online. Rob, thanks for your comment, and I know it stands out. And it's nice that you have family on the call too. Nachas all the way around. Any other questions or comments?
Lots of comments, but I think we have time for others to raise their hand if anyone has a question like they'd like to share. Okay, I can pull out. Okay, great.
Oh,
Lois.
there. Hi, Lois.
Oh,
Oh, Lois, I see you. You have to you unmuted but then remuted. So
No.
there you
Can you
are.
hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So my question is, if we're talking about all these possible animals that were used for the Mishkan, why did the people traveling across the desert complain they had no meat to eat? And complain and complain and complain.
Yeah, that's there's a contrast, right? One of the themes of the book of Exodus, um, post the Exodus, is the complaining people. And it'll come back in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, as well. Though that's an awesome question that needs some commentary too. If they had all this stuff, how could they complain about not having enough? It seems if there was enough to make the Mishkan, maybe that's a suggestion that they weren't, the times weren't as hard as the complaining Israelites thought. There seems to be an inconsistency of the text. Some commentators try to resolve that, but there is some dissonance, which you pointed out, that if they had animals from whom they could use the leather, how is it that they didn't have meat? It is possible, right? The explanation that says they took all this stuff from the Egyptians said they might have had leather, but not animals. So that's sort of a practical answer. There's the answer that, says that things don't always square in the Torah, meaning there are contradictions in the Torah and the Torah is not bothered by it and we are, but, so there's room for commentary. There's an opening to enter our own commentary there. But it's possible that, these traditions there's a tradition of a complaining people who don't have enough. And then there's this moment of generosity about building the Mishkan, and some level the details don't add up. Two possible paths for that. All right, Raphael, I think your hand was next, and then if hopefully we'll have time for you and for Phyllis.
Thanks. Rav, regarding incense, are there any prohibited scents or any ordinance regarding which ones to use?
Oh, that it says that the incense.
Yes.
There are later in the descriptions that follow in the next weeks ahead, there are some details that appear about what incense was used in the tabernacle, which if you read on, there'll be some more in the details that are coming that Rob alluded to. There's some descriptions of that. We know only from the Bible. The Bible is the only description of the tabernacle and the desert. In rabbinic literature, we have descriptions of different incenses, right, or spices that might have been used in the temple based on the rabbinic recollection of that. You could look towards the Mishnah to looking towards that. The specific details of which incenses and, a more detailed answer to that question, I'd have to do a little digging to answer that. But the Torah will hint at some, and from centuries later, the rabbinic record describes potentially what there had been in the temple, which was later, but if it preserved earlier traditions, might give us some sense. We'd have to do a little digging to get the list a little more. All right, Phyllis.
I'm rooting for the dolphins because there's actually dolphins in the Nile, and their skins would be very waterproof, and they were going to be used for the roof. So I'm a dolphin fan.
Nice. Nice. Right. There is, right, some of the reason that sea creatures, whether it's dolphin or narwhal or dugong, come up here, because between the Red Sea or potentially the Nile, right, there are some sea creatures that it's possible were in the region that fit. That led some commentators to go to that route. And as you noted, the dolphin skin, right, which functions for the dolphin underwater, might be good for the roof. Although for the Sinai desert, at least, where the Israelites were wandering, not so much rain there during the year, but the tabernacle had a life afterwards, so you never know. So you could keep rooting for the, I see someone made the joke I was going to do, the Nile Dolphins or the Miami Dolphins. We can go to football as well. All right, Marlon.
I just
Marilyn.
wanted to note that you early on you mentioned about the blue and purple dyes. That's also something that's unknown, if I'm remembering correctly, where that blue came from. And the most common explanation I've heard is it came from a mollusk that's now extinct. Well, that's also a non-kosher creature. And that always, that always confused me too, is that I couldn't imagine them using mollusk ink for the holiest item we have in Judaism.
It's true. We know the purple and the blues and those dyes, they were colors associated with royalty, and that we believe right in ancient Egypt and the ancient Near East, they used those colors. The actual blues, we know, right, there was a tradition to dye one of the tzitzit, the fringes that you put on your garments, in that color. And over the centuries, we lost touch with exactly where that came from. The rabbis in the Gemara think it came from some sort of mollusk that produces a bluish ink. And the question about, how can we use something that comes from a non-kosher animal for a sacred purpose? It could be raised there too, lands in a different place from the discussion that I quoted today, but parallel as well. And the blue fringe in the tzitzit, even though we don't know exactly what they made it from then, in some Jewish communities, it's made a resurgence. And more and more you see people who are using some blue dye on one of their tzitzit today to try to bring that back, even if it's a new source for the dye from what was used in ancient time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You're welcome. Thanks for bringing that up. It's always a pleasure to study Torah with all of you. And I have an appreciation for the people from around the country who are coming in a different way this morning, because I live in South Orange, New Jersey, but I'm in Champaign, Illinois today. So the Torah learning was an hour earlier for me. So kudos to everyone, Central Time and Westward who's here for the early rising. But equally, Shabbat Shalom to everybody wherever you are in the world. And may we all find a little bit of peace on this Shabbat. I've been thinking a lot about peace, but that's a conversation for a different day.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you everyone for being here, especially those for this was your first time. We hope to see every single one of you here next week. And I echo Rabbi's message of a Shabbat Shalom. Be well, everyone.
All right. Take care. Nice to see you all. Shabbat Shalom.